Will and Jane meet at their friend's wedding and instantly feel a crazy chemistry between them. At the celebration, they enjoy a couple of drinks and discuss the newlyweds. During the walk, they spot a motionless cat and think that it is dead. Jane decides to tell the truth and confesses that her first thought when she saw Will was about hooking up with him in a coat room. As Will says that he likes Jane's idea, the cat suddenly wakes up, and the couple thinks it is a good sign. They decide to realize their plan and run to the coat room, where they start making out and almost become intimate. At the last moment, Will changes his mind and tells Jane that he can't hook up with a stranger. Embarrassed and offended by his rejection, Jane flees the scene, but Will decides to follow her and try to resolve the conflict. She leaves the wedding and goes for a walk, and Will offers to give her a ride to grab some coffee. After Jane lays in the back seat to relax, Will wants to tell her more about his life. He is a commercial photographer, and Jane is a freelance writer. She thinks that they have nothing in common except for their embarrassing sexual experience in the coat room. But Will decides to tell her more about his awkward background in the past. He tells Jane about his first lover, Jody, from high school. His first time with her ended up pretty bad, and it makes Jane laugh. Will's relationship with Jody didn't last long because he had to leave town to study at college. But when he returned home to surprise her, he discovered that Jody was cheating on him, so he ended things with her. Will and Jane stop by to eat some pies and have coffee. Jane is hungry, and Will offers her his pie if she tells him about when her heart was broken for the first time. She accepts the rules of their game and tells him about her first love. It was in high school. Michael was quite a bad boy, and everyone thought that Jane was dating him because of her low self-esteem. Michael didn't tell Jane anything about himself, so she decided to learn something herself and paid a visit to his mom. After Jane revealed Michael's secret about his terminally ill father who had just died, Michael broke up with her for invading his personal life. To distract themselves from sad memories, Will and Jane continue their ride and find an old amusement park. They break into the park and have fun observing all the attractions around. Of course, they get caught and have to leave the place before the guard calls the police. Will decides to tell Jane everything about his past romances. She thinks that they will never see each other again, and opening up to a stranger might be a good idea after all. Will tells Jane about Eve. Will was a young college student and avoided any serious commitments. One day, he met a pretty woman named Eve on campus, where she was visiting her cousin. She flirted with him, and after some small talk, he invited her to his room, where they got intimate. Later, Eve invited him to spend the weekend at her place and introduced Will to her friends. Everyone noticed that Will was younger than Eve, but she didn't care about anyone's opinion. They started dating, but Will didn't take their relationship seriously. Eventually, he realized that he had to pay more attention to his studies and see Eve less often. She expressed her disappointment and told Will that she loved him. However, this didn't change Will's mind, and he decided to end things with Eve, prioritizing his education over their relationship. Jane decides to head home, so she exchanges numbers with Will and leaves. He returns to the wedding but doesn't have the mood for a party, so he just spends time alone. Jane changes her mind and calls Will, intending to tell her story. When she was in college, she started dating a guy named Elton. He was an eccentric and emotional young man, but Jane loved him and didn't want to notice all the red flags in his behavior. He encouraged her to skip classes and had paranoid thoughts, but Jane kept dating him. Until one day, he ended up on the college's rooftop and wanted to jump from there as a romantic gesture for Jane. Thankfully, he was stopped and sent to a mental clinic by his mother. Jane visited him once but realized that he would never fully recover. Jane was too young and didn't need such a burden in her life, so she left Elton and never saw him again. Will asks Jane where she is and joins her at the beach. They share stories about their problematic childhoods and realize that they have much more in common than they thought before. They want to have dinner together and find a little cafe, but it is closed due to someone's anniversary. It doesn't stop the couple, and they attend the party where a pair of old married people warmly greet them and invite Will and Jane to join their celebration. Jane and Will learn some little little secrets of a happy marriage and have an amazing time. After they leave the party and need to decide what to do next, Will invites Jane to spend the night in his hotel. Before giving Will another chance, Jane asks him if there is anything or anyone that could hinder their future relationship, and Will assures her that there isn't. For the last year, he had many one-night stands, but none of them were serious. Will just wanted to sort things out in his life, and starting a relationship was too much for him at this period of time. Jane tells Will about the most serious relationship in her life. 3 months ago, she started dating a lawyer named Mark. He was a perfect boyfriend, kind, handsome, rich, and crazily in love with Jane. They got engaged, and Mark introduced Jane to his parents and his emotionally unstable brother, Todd. Jane got tired of constant drama in her life and wanted some stability, and Mark was the best candidate for a happy marriage. Their engagement lasted 13 days until Todd showed up at Jane's doorstep and seduced her. Jane hesitated but still cheated on Mark with his own brother. When she told Mark the truth, he left her and canceled their engagement. This story blows Will's mind, but he doesn't judge Jane because everyone makes mistakes. Now, when Will and Jane know almost everything about each other, Will trusts her completely. They relocate to Will's hotel and everything leads to a hot and steamy night together. But Jane suddenly pulls back. She has one more story, a very painful one, and she wants to tell it to Will. While studying for her master's degree, Jane had an affair with her teacher, Wallace Fielding. He was a failed writer and former alcoholic, but Jane sincerely loved him. She quickly moved into his house and started living with him. Unfortunately, the ghosts of his past began following Wallace, and he started drinking again. Jane wanted to leave him, so Wallace made his last desperate attempt to hold her back by proposing to Jane, but she had already made up her mind and left Wallace anyway. Shortly after that, Wallace died, so Jane started blaming herself for his death, and she still does. She tells Will that she is walking chaos and a very bad savior, but Will doesn't need a savior. He needs Jane. He consoles Jane and tells her about Audrey. 5 years ago, he was tasked with taking photos of a music band, and Audrey was a singer in that band. Will and Audrey started dating and living together, but quickly broke up. When Jane interrupts Will's story, he kisses her. They slowly undress each other and listen to one another's hearts. This time is different for both of them, because now they have feelings for each other. They make love and spend the night together. While Will is in the bathroom, Jane accidentally finds his love letter addressed to someone named Juliet. She confronts Will about the letter, and he tells her the second part of Audrey's story. He broke up with her, unaware of her pregnancy. She gave birth to their daughter, Juliet. Will tries to be a good father to her and doesn't want to hide this part of his life. Jane feels sad and angry because Will had to tell her about having a daughter before they spent the night together. She leaves Will and heads home. Will sits on the beach alone and calls Juliet. They have a heartfelt conversation, and Will says that he loves and misses her. Full of emotions, Will relieves his stress by swimming in the sea. Jane calls a taxi but starts crying in the middle of the way. She realizes that she loves Will and wants to be with him no matter what. She finds Will and happily runs into his arms. Will admits that he wants Jane to be part of his life and wants to introduce her to Juliet. Jane and Will have only known each other for 1 day, but both want their conversation to last forever. They love and understand each other, and their bond becomes the start of their own amazing love story.